It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
I welcome the decision of the Supreme Court, which has given us clarity, much needed clarity.
The Prime Minister responds to last week's Supreme Court ruling on the legal definition of a woman.
Trans race! Where do we want them? No!
But many trans people say it leaves them in legal limbo. We'll be speaking to a barrister and trans rights campaigner. Also today...
Being in politics is to be criticised every single day. The job of a politician is to make difficult decisions, and some people will be upset about that.
We'll ask Kemi Badenoch's right-hand man if her position as Tory leader is under threat. And this historian wants us to show more moral ambition when it comes to work. What exactly does he mean? Joining me today, Labour MP Natasha Irons, Conservative MP and Shadow Cabinet Minister Alex Burghardt, historian and author Rutger Bregman, and broadcaster and political commentator Alex Phillips. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. So, MPs are back, so is Parliament. We have two MPs gracing our studio here today, as usual. They're bracing themselves for a key report from the International Monetary Fund about the world's economic outlook and what it could mean for the UK. It'll be out shortly this afternoon. Well, let's talk about trade deals in relation to that economic outlook. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is travelling to Washington for meetings with G7, G20 and IMF counterparts. She'll also be holding her first in-person meeting with her US counterpart to discuss a potential new trade deal. There's also the prospect of securing another deal closer to home. Let's have a look at this headline in The Times. Starmer close to EU arms deal at the expense of fishermen. It's reported the government is close to striking a deal with the EU, one that could allow British arms manufacturers to bid for contracts from the EU's new £130 billion defence fund, if the UK makes concessions on fishing quotas. My opening question to the panel, starting with you, Natasha, is which deal is more important to the UK? The US-UK trade deal or the one with the EU?
I think we have to be careful walking this binary choice between the UK and the EU. I think our future lies with both of these key trading partners. It's really great that we're in the position with the US that we can still have these conversations with them. I think it's shows the great leadership that Keir Starmer has had to keep us in this position and keep us in the game when it comes to speaking to the US. But we have to face the reality that the EU is on our doorstep. The deal that we currently have isn't working and is creating a lot of barriers for our businesses, and we have to get to a better place with them.
Can we have both? Are they compatible? Which one do you think is more important?
Of course they're compatible, but it very much depends on what you choose to do on either side. So if, for example, Keir Starmer signs us up to dynamic alignment with the EU, that will make it much harder to get a trade deal. And we know that that's one of the things that the government is currently considering in its negotiations with the EU. Now, very important that Rachel Reeves, on her visit to Washington this week, comes back with a deal. Some major industries in our country are depending upon it. Pharmaceuticals, automotive, and...
You think she has to succeed where previous Conservative governments didn't?
Well, previous Conservative governments, as you know, Jo, were making a lot of progress towards this because Kemi Badenoch was Secretary of State for Business and Trade at the time of the general election and had been working on that trade deal. I think it's quite wrong that the Chancellor is only just going to meet her counterpart for the first time. That's several months wasted. What we really need now is certainty for British business, and she's got to deliver the goods this week.
Alex, which one is more important in terms of trade deal for the UK?
Right, well, isn't it wonderful to have the choice? We're not in the EU's customs union, so we can make our own trade deal with America. How fantastic is that we have sovereignty over these issues? And ironic that the Labour Party is saying, oh, yes, we might be able to go and get a trade deal, when about a year ago they wanted to drag us back into that customs union. I think our trading relationship with America is exciting. When you look at the dot-com industry, all the future-proofed industries going forward, it is happening in America. There is no such thing as a Google or an Apple coming out of Europe. But actually, I think we're missing what the real dichotomy is here. America doesn't so much necessarily want us to choose between the EU and itself. It wants us to make a decision over China. That is what these tariffs are all about.
Right. Do you agree with that, Natasha?
I don't actually agree with that. I don't think we can, we are, you just said, a sovereign nation. We can decide how we move forward with our trading partners across the world, and that's up to us as a nation to decide. China will be important for us going forward if we're thinking about growth and investment, but we do also need to be careful about protecting those key infrastructure assets in our country. We need to think about things like steel, about whether or not it's time for us to stand on our own 2 feet, and we have to be careful about who we partner with in those situations.
What does making a deal with the US even mean these days? I mean, you guys talk about as if it's a normal country, but it's court politics right now. You have a mad king who changes his mind every day. So, I mean, if you make a deal with the EU, it's a real deal. But if you make a deal with the US, not sure what that means today.
I'm not sure our relationship with the EU has always worked out on the grounds of particular parity, to be honest, the things we've had to sacrifice. And one of the whole tenets of Brexit was being able to actually come of bespoke trading relationships. And fundamentally, if you look at the weight of our trade, America is still our biggest trading partner.
Mm-hmm. But the EU is the biggest trading bloc. Do you think the benefits will be substantial?
Yeah, I mean, look, when one approaches global trade, as an island nation, we should be looking at approaching things globally. And actually, Natasha, when it comes to China, America is going to punish countries that cozy up to Beijing with extra tariffs. They've actually made that abundantly clear. You talk about the elements of national security, and I totally agree with what you're saying. But the Labour Party, since they've come into power, has been more keen to fly east and go and see what President Xi wants and write big charity checks to Beijing in order to, continue the sort of net zero zealousy.
Well, look, I think anyone who has been watching what our Prime Minister has been doing over the last 9 months can see that the importance of our relationship with the US, and you can see the investment in that relationship. And, we're still inviting President Trump here for a state visit. Those things are still happening. I don't think anyone can accuse this country of turning its back on the US.
Well, can you answer Alex Rutger's question? And Rutger is Dutch, just to point out to our audience, that actually a trade deal with the US under Donald Trump isn't really worth the paper it's written on, because he can't be trusted.
No, I don't, with due respect, I don't agree with that. I think if the Trump administration signs a deal with the UK, it will honour the deal that it's struck. It might not, what we're seeing at the moment is it's not keen to honour deals that its predecessors have made. But that's why it's very important that the Chancellor gets a deal now that protects the industries that matter to lots of workers across the country.
What do you say to that?
Well, I guess we live on different planets. I think the reality is just very, very different right now. I mean, the economy is totally crashing right now in the United States. That's, I guess, maybe one of the good things, is that people are waking up that it's not really great to have one mad king at the center of it all. So, yeah.
All right.
I think it's been amusing to see Mr. Starmer to, suck up to Trump with his letter, etc. But he'll need a lot more of that, I think, in the future.
We'll move on. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that biological sex defines a woman for the purposes of the Equality Act. This morning, we had the first sort of cabinet response, if you like, to that ruling. Women and Equalities Minister Bridget Phillipson was asked a direct question following that ruling. Should a trans woman use the women's toilet or the men's toilet? Let's hear what she had to say in response.
That should be on the basis of biological sex. That would apply right across the board to all single-sex provision. But the EHRC will be setting out additional guidance and a statutory code of practice, because we need to make sure that everyone has the ability to access services that are safe and appropriate and respect their privacy and dignity.
Right, well, let's talk to Robin Moira-White, a discrimination barrister. Welcome to you, Robin. Do you accept the ruling?
I accept the analysis that the Supreme Court have made of the Equality Act.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, we've had Sir Keir Starmer saying we've got clarity. I'm afraid to say what we've got clarity on, because we didn't have the Gender Recognition Act out of the kindness of the heart of a government. We had the Gender Recognition Act because the European Court of Human Rights told us that we had to have an effective means of acknowledging someone's change of gender. And what we appear to have achieved clarity on is that we don't have that. So the UK is now in breach of its obligations under the European Convention of Human Rights.
Well, Natasha, what do you say to that?
Well, I'd say that we welcome the clarity that this has provided the service providers, it's provided government. And I do appreciate Robin's contribution to this discussion. I think that what we need to do now is focus much more on how we protect trans people, because I think as much as the clarity is welcome, we must acknowledge that there will be trans people that feel vulnerable, and we have to ensure that trans people are not facing discrimination in their everyday lives. I want trans people to be able to still live, work and live with the dignity and respect that everybody else has. And I think we have an opportunity actually to take this from being a screaming match online and into a conversation that's much more constructive and much more about, well, how do we protect single-sex spaces but also ensure that trans people get to live with dignity and respect? And I hope that's where we start to get to.
Are you reassured by that, Robin, in terms of the safety and protections for trans people?
Well, what I'm afraid to say I think is going to happen, and there's a law of unintended consequences here. I've already been working with business. Now, business doesn't want to be sued by anyone, either by disaffected trans people or by people who think trans people should be excluded. And I think we're going to see many, many more gender-neutral spaces and spaces that are currently separated by sex, moving to gender neutrality, because that's a circumstance where business can stand back and say, well, we're meeting the law. But that may not be what people intended.
Right. Well, it may not be what people intended, Alex, but wouldn't that be a pretty good solution to have more gender-neutral facilities, particularly when it comes to issues like toilets?
Look, I think if there's provision of a gender-neutral bathroom for people who don't want to use the male or the female bathroom, great, but there needs to be women's toilets. End of. I am not having a situation where women are being forced to share their personal, intimate spaces with people of the opposite sex. And I just want to say, there are people celebrating, finally, we've got clarity from the Supreme Court. Why did we have to spend 5 years for women just to be identified as women? 100 years after we get the vote, and we're having to fight in the highest court of the land to even exist. And I appreciate that we must make sure that we have compassion to people fighting genuine gender dysphoria. But this should never, ever have been at the expense of the safeguarding of little girls and women. That, to me, was an absolute abrogation of duty.
Robin?
Well, I'm afraid to say I think that's the direction, I know that's the direction that business is going to move in. And everyone's safety is important, but I think we have to recognise what are real risks and what are not real risks. I'm sure that this is going to end up in front of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, because we've wound back to pre-Goodwin, which was the case that took us in this direction. And I know that those cases are being prepared as we speak.
Alex, do you think there is a risk in the way Robin has set out of the UK being in breach of the European Court of Human Rights when it comes to this decision?
I don't know, Joe. I'm not a human rights lawyer. I'm not a lawyer at all. What I do think is that it's very important that the government needs to take whatever legal steps are necessary to ensure that women do not need to share those safe, intimate spaces with biological men. And if this court ruling, if there is ambiguity, as your guest online has said, then the government needs to clarify that. Girls and women, if they do not want to share safe, intimate spaces with biological men, should not have to.
Right. I mean, that is about shared spaces. When it comes to toilets, you are in separate cubicles, in a sense. Does it matter? I mean, what do you make of the ruling overall, Rutger?
I'm honestly really frustrated by the fact that this is sucking up so much attention, right? That this is really become at the heart of the political debates. I mean, we have very big national and global problems that we face in this country. Total lack of affordable housing, a huge climate crisis. Globally, we've got 15,000 kids dying from easily preventable diseases. And pandemic around the corner.
This is very important to a lot of my constituents who are women, right?
Sure, but we've got to depoliticize it. Why do we have these endless debates about what's happening?
Please don't try and sideline this. This is very important to a lot of people who live in this country.
Rutger?
Yeah, I think I disagree. I think a
And
lot of people
so
want to
you're-
depoliticize.
that's what you're wrong
his
about.
point. Let him finish
It's
his point,
very
Alex,
important
and I'll
to a lot
come
of
back
people
you.
in this country.
Go on, Rutger.
Yeah, well, it's easy to score a lot of political points with
No,
it.
we're not scoring political
That's
points.
very
We're
true.
representing our
Yeah.
constituents, Rutger. And for you, it might not be important to you,
Yeah.
but it is important to a lot of people who live in my constituency.
Sure, but I think that a lot of people think that there's a reasonable middle ground here, that we can find out local solutions, that politicians, don't need to get obsessed about it all the time. Like the moral outrage that you guys have about this issue, I find it really, well, both amusing and depressing, honestly.
Really? Amusing and depressing, the moral outrage. Is it eating up too much oxygen? Has it done in the past?
It has done. But one thing I do agree with Rutger on, there was a very simple solution that could have come about years ago, which is make sure there is a provision for a gender-neutral toilet and then keep men's and women's toilets. Done. That should have been the conclusion years ago, not the vilification of women who simply wanted to fight for their integrity, their identity, their safety. It does matter to women. I, as a woman, do not feel comfortable going into a changing rooms or using toilet facilities where there are men present. And that is true, I think, of the vast majority of women, and particularly, I might add, women from minority communities. So this is hugely important to 50% of the population, but I do agree, there was a simple solution at the outset. We allowed ourselves to be caught up in this complete maelstrom of mania.
Well, and some of it is because the Labour Party couldn't actually help themselves in terms of the definition.
Well, no, I think the Labour Party's been very clear about protecting single-sex spaces, and I think that the Labour Party went into the election talking about that. We were talking about this being important to women. It's also important to trans people. I mean, some of my constituents are trans people and have explained that they're, how the world makes them feel. I think that we're in a position now, as I said, to have a genuine, calm, rational, non-judgmental conversation about how this moves forward, because it's important that every person in this country can live with dignity and respect. And that's that. And that's what the Equality Act is trying to do.
So surely just having a gender-neutral toilet available is the
a lot of
problem
spaces
solved?
already do. I mean, if you go to, most cafes already do. That's how that works. But the next step of this is how do we make this practical? How do we make sure that, the guidance is clear for organisations?
Well, let's talk about some of the
that.
guidance, because it is about the application. Robin White, in terms of responding to what Bridget Phillipson has said when she was asked about the issues earlier today, how do you feel about her saying that trans women should use men's toilets?
Well, I'm afraid to say that takes us into the area of challenge that I talked about previously. But there is actually an easy solution which deals with that there are a relatively small proportion of people who, for religious reasons, for personal reasons, for whatever, need an enhanced level of privacy. And if, along with the gendered versions, a separate single facility is provided, and we're not prescriptive about who is forced into that facility, so anyone who needs additional privacy, wants additional privacy, can use that, then that might be the solution.
Right, but then when you are looking forward, the issue that Rutger raised about has this just taken up too much bandwidth in terms of political discussions? I was talking about it today. We've talked before this ruling, Robin White, about the issue of transgender rights. Is it really the salient issue of the day?
It's tremendously important to a small number of people on both sides of the debate. And if we don't deal with it in a proper and sensitive way for everyone for whom it's a concern, then it will keep occupying bandwidth.
Right, but do you think this will go some way, this Supreme Court ruling, in terms of clearing that up, even if there are...
I think I agree with the comment that we should treat this as an opportunity for a sensitive discussion about the way forward. What I'm disappointed to see is that there's an element of territory marking going on, as far as I can see. And as I say, there is a straightforward solution that works in a number of workplaces where a facility with additional privacy is provided, but we're not prescriptive about who has to go and use that. And that's available. Therefore, if someone is concerned about who they would share a space with, they can use that facility that provides additional privacy, and their needs are met.
You're shaking your head, Alex.
Because that seems to be suggesting that everything is unisex, so women are still forced to share their toilet spaces with men, and then there's one separate toilet for women who don't want to do that. I'm sorry, women are 50% of the population. If there is a gender-neutral toilet, that makes sense on balance. Otherwise, what you're going to end up with is the queue to the single toilet is going to be just all women whose lives are therefore blighted by being forced to share just one toilet rather than having their single-sex space. It makes no sense.
Robin?
It works very practically in a number of locations where that's provided.
Where?
Well, let's
I'm a woman. I don't think it does.
Well, let's put toilets to one side. There are other areas where this is going to become an issue. The British Transport Police has announced that trans women in custody will now be searched by male officers as an interim measure while it reviews its policies and practices. Are you comfortable with that?
I mean, I can't really comment on the operational sort of way things that police do. I would I would question the timing of that, how quickly you can suddenly go, we're just going to do this. But secondly, what it means for women who are biologically women who might be a little bit more masculine. If somebody suddenly says, well, I believe you to be a trans woman, what evidence do they have to produce to say that they're not, and they don't get strip searched by a male officer? That, I think, is a concern. And I think that's why we need to take, again, the heat out of this and have a proper, non-judgmental conversation about how we apply these things properly.
When it comes to sport, for example, Alex, what then are the rights of trans women, for example? Is Baroness Falkender right from the Equalities Commission to say, well, they probably won't be able to take part?
Yeah, my personal view is that if you've been through male puberty, that you shouldn't be competing in women's sports. As a kind of base level, if you're a biological man, you shouldn't be competing in women's sports. But where there is agreement is that the judgment has created, whilst it's given a finding, it's also created a number of uncertainties. Very important that the government moves quickly to explain exactly how it's going to deal with this new world.
Right, and there is disagreement within the Labour Party. Ministers' leaked WhatsApp messages have suggested that there are big differences. People are concerned exactly about the application of the law and feel it could be overreached to the detriment of transgender people. Do you have sympathy with your colleagues?
I have sympathy with my colleagues who want to discuss this further, but again, having the space and the time to have those conversations and talk about how this will impact trans people's lives and how we ensure that trans people remain with the dignity and respect that they are entitled to. I have sympathy with my colleagues having those conversations. I think they're entitled to have those conversations.
Right, but Robin, where does it leave a gender recognition certificate? Because if that is no longer recognised in the law in terms of being defined as a woman, what's the point of having it?
Well, it is still effective in a number of areas, such as marriage. If one wishes to marry in what one regards as one's affirmed gender, on death, for example. But you identify the fundamental difficulty under the European Convention. That's what the UK enacted as its way of recognising trans people in their affirmed gender. And if what we've done is exclude them from an enormous slice of the protections in our society, which is what the Equality Act provides, that's what gets us into that difficulty.
Right. I mean, do you think this really is going to sort of end the bandwidth, the amount of time that is spent discussing this?
Hopefully so, as the problems in the world get worse. I mean, maybe we don't have the luxury to spend so much time on it anymore. I think one of the reasons it does, get so much attention is because it's relatively easy to have strong opinions about this, both on the far left and on the far right. So, yeah, it's great for political hobbyists who love to score points. But if we actually care about the deep problems that this country or the whole Western world faces, I think it will be much smarter to try our best to depoliticize it and to find all kinds of local solutions and indeed to take some of the heat out of it and have reasonable discussions. I'm sure there's, in many cases, like a reasonable middle ground.
Right. Just finally, Robin, what next in terms of what you will do to either challenge this or try and find more protections for trans people?
Well, I've certainly got a client, for example, who is involved in litigation at the moment, and they may very well have won their case before the Supreme Court judgment, and the Supreme Court judgment may interfere with that. And they're contemplating what I've been saying, which is why I've been talking about Europe. there are a number of trans people who are horrified, of course, at the idea of being, these are people perhaps who transitioned 40 years ago and are horrified at the idea of being put on what they would regard as the wrong NHS ward. We're likely to see litigation when that happens. Equally, those people who believe that they've achieved something in terms of excluding trans people from facilities, I'm fearful that we will start to see inappropriate action directed at trans people by them.
Robin White, thank you very much for joining us. Next Thursday, 1st of May, it is local elections day for 23 councils and 6 mayors in England. There is also a by-election in Runcorn. No doubt our politicians here will be busy campaigning over the next week or so. Do you accept, Alex Burkhardt, it will be a verdict on Kemi Badenoch's leadership?
I think we're going to, we know that we've got a challenging time ahead of us, but principally because...
Well, that's politician speak for you going to lose a load of seats.
Well, we had, 4 years ago, we had a very, very good night. It was the vaccine bounce, and we had, I think, unprecedented results for that point in the political cycle. And obviously, this time, there's a new political party as well, Reform, and these present challenges to us. But we're out campaigning very hard and doing what we can to make sure that we have a good showing come the 1st of May.
Right, and will it be a verdict on Kemi Badenoch's leadership?
No, I don't think it will. I think it's going to be a reflection of things like turnout, be a reflection of what's happening in particular areas, not least Birmingham, where we've seen a massive failure of local services under a Labour council, where you now actually have a major potential health and safety crisis brewing. So I think that the public will understandably look at issues like that and make their own judgment.
Right, and what about a verdict on Keir Starmer's leadership? It may be 5.5 months for Kemi Badenoch at the helm of the Conservatives, but of course he's been Prime Minister since last July, first big set of elections. Will it be a verdict on him? Well,
look, we've been cracking on with the job. We've got the NHS waiting list down 6 months in a row. We've got more GPs and we've got NHS waiting times coming down. We've been cracking on with the job. This is going to be a test of Kemi Badenoch's leadership, and it's also going to be a test of whether or not the Conservative Party has got its act together and is going in a direction that's coherent. I'm not sure it is. We talk about the kind of health and safety crisis in Birmingham. It's more of a health and safety crisis with the Conservative Party. Most, the average council tax bill in Labour-run councils is about £200 to £300 less than it is in the Conservative one. It's going to be interesting.
You pay less in Conservative councils and you get better services.
You pay more and you get less. And what's going to happen?
You look at Band D analysis.
If Kemi Badenoch was so confident in her direction in which she's taking your party, why is she trying to make dodgy deals with Reform to get through this election?
She's not making any deals with Reform. What are you talking about?
Well, we've asked whether or not there's going to be a partnership at the local elections.
She said no. Why are you raising this up? She's always said there is no deal with Reform. Why are you making this up?
Well, it's good to see that's been clarified here.
No, this is just like sort of fake politics, isn't it? You
no,
just come on and say
we wrote a letter. No, we wrote a letter. We didn't get a response.
You wrote a letter? Gosh, wow.
Ellie Reid, the chair of our party, wrote to your chair, wrote to the Reform Party's chair, and we didn't get a response.
Well, just watch the news.
Right, well, Alex,
there's never been a deal with Reform.
Well, I look forward to the response.
Why did you make that up?
I will look forward to the response you send.
All right, I'm going to leave you two here and go to the other Alex. Alex Phillips, you're sitting there smiling at the bickering going on between the two main parties, perhaps in part because there is a real threat of Reform winning hundreds of seats. We don't know, but it's certainly been forecast. But they've also been plagued by infighting. One MP has dropped off and is no longer within the party. The reality may be quite different, mightn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but actually it hasn't seemed to have plagued Reform's polling at all. That is what's quite astonishing. I mean, look, when a pollster actually looked at the sort of brand awareness, let's say, of Rupert Lowe, even 70% of people who intended to vote Reform hadn't heard of him. So it's not really impacting on the wider scale. What's interesting, though, in terms of local elections, they've always been regarded as the litmus test, haven't they, both within political parties and by the media at large. But what's more important, actually, is if you start hemorrhaging a lot of local councillors, you're losing local activists. You're basically gutting the sort of underbelly of the vehicle of a whole, the nuts and the bolts that actually make a party work at grassroots. And so for Reform, I think what they see is it's very important to get a really strong political foothold, start being able to target constituencies where they're going to want to get seats in the general election. And they're regarding these local elections as the first step to doing that, which is why, as I understand, they're fielding more candidates than the two legacy parties.
Right, sounds like the Liberal Democrats. That's always been their strategy too, of course. What are you doing about the threat of reform, Alex Burkhardt?
We're out campaigning very hard on the local issues that matter to constituents across the country.
But that's with all parties. But what are you doing specifically to blunt the threat of reform?
But obviously, Jay, that we're fighting a positive campaign. We're fighting a positive campaign on low council tax, on better services, and fixing roads, where the things that traditionally Conservative-held councils have done well. And we're trying to get that message to all parts of the country.
Do you think the criticism from parts of the Conservative Party itself, whether it be grassroots or even some MPs, criticism of Kemi Badenoch not making enough progress are unfair?
Yeah, I do actually. But I think that everyone, if you talk to people who know about politics, they understand the situation we're in. We've come out of power after 14 years. There is a new political party on the right, and which, if you look at all of the polls, those three parties are basically tied. Sometimes we're slightly up, sometimes Reform's slightly up, sometimes Labour's slightly up. But you have a unique political situation, and that is tough for Keir Starmer, but it's tough for Nigel Farage. The truth is that Kemi is helping the Conservatives express themselves under new leadership, a new generation of people who've taken over, and you'll see over the course of time, as our policy work rolls out, that we are the sensible alternative to the other two.
I mean, we have a situation here, Rutger, where the two main parties, Labour in government and the Conservative opposition, are going into these local elections with a new party, or newish party, Reform, challenging both of them, perhaps the Conservatives more. What do you make of this insurgency challenging the incumbent parties when you look at home, perhaps in Holland and other European countries?
Well, I currently live in New York, so I'm always very happy to see a healthy democracy, and some healthy debate, because as an immigrant currently, in the US, you have to worry about whether you get kicked out of the country if you say the wrong things. So we got to be happy with what we have, I guess.
Right. I mean, in terms of the priority for Reform, how many seats do you think they're aiming to win?
I would have no idea, I'm afraid, Jo. I'm not the spokesperson for the party.
No, but do you think they would be aiming for hundreds of seats? Do you think
I would
it's
assume
realistic?
so. I think so, yeah. I mean, look, I was with Nigel Farage back in 2013 when he was leader of UKIP, as you know, Jo. I was the sort of head of media at that point, and that was when Reform came third in those local elections. And it really, when UKIP came third in those local elections, and it really was sort of headline-making stuff. I remember the swarm of paparazzi outside this building the morning after. And actually, what we're potentially going to see now, more than 10 years later, is Reform probably getting even higher up than third overall. But let's see. I think we live in exciting political times. And actually, Rutger's right. This is a live, breathing, kicking democracy in action. And what we've had for over a century are two parties controlling politics. The football's been passed from one to the other, and the public is saying, hey, we might be interested in something new. And I think that is actually, quite thrilling to be living through those times.
We will, of course, find out all the results next week. It wouldn't be local elections without a few policies thrown in. They do still happen. Kemi Badenoch is pushing the government to put an end to non-crime hate incidents. But actually, non-crime hate incidents were rather embraced by your shadow Home Secretary. He was policing minister, I think, at the time, Chris Philp. He endorsed them, embraced them, expanded them. What's changed?
Well, he also attempted to put limits on them in 2023. And the truth is that non-crime hate incidents, one of these things that first emerged, I think, around about 20 years ago, in a completely different world, where we didn't have social media, where we didn't have online debate. And it's very clear now that a huge amount of police resource, about 60,000 hours of police time, is going into scanning people's social media in order to see whether they've created, the clue is in the title, a non-crime hate incident. And I think Kemi and Chris Philp have quite rightly reached the conclusion that this is a poor use of public resources, and that obviously you need to have safeguards and checks against people who are involved in extreme and violent racism. That exists in the law already. It's already criminal. You do not need non-crime hate incidents in order to police that.
Do you agree? Should they be scrapped?
Well, I'm just genuinely, I find it quite frustrating that we're in a situation where the Conservative Party, when they were in power and had every opportunity to change these things...
Labour is in power now. What do you think?
I think we have to think about why we have these. We have these because they build up a picture. We have these because they would come out of the Macpherson report after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, because it helps to build up a data picture of people for instances of racism or anti-Semitism, doing things that, if you look at the bigger picture, would lead to a prosecution. Those things are still true, and those things are still relevant. Now, do we need to amend how we look at social media? Perhaps, but the key and the nugget of why we need these things to remain in place. If the Conservative Party didn't think that we needed to still build that picture when we were prosecuting somebody, they could have scrapped these. And as you said, Chris Philp was out defending them just 2 years ago.
Is that a fair point?
No, it's not. I know, as I said, Chris tried to put
not Chris, but just why they're there in the first place and what they.
As I say, if you read the Macpherson report, terrible murder of Stephen Lawrence, the very extreme racist comments, violent racist comments that his killers used would have fallen foul of other legislation, and so you don't actually. And again, what was created for in an attempt to deal with a specific purpose 20 years ago is now being used in an entirely different age to try and cover huge amounts of things, actually often very non-contentious things that people are saying online.
All right,
so, when times change, you have to change your legislation and you have to change the way in which the criminal justice
Well, let's look
system
at another
works.
policy, this being put forward by the government. BBC News headline, nationalities of foreign criminals to be published for the first time. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is understood to have ordered officials to publish the data, including crimes that have been committed by the end of the year. Why? What's this going to do?
It's for transparency. People have been asking for transparency over these figures for many, many years. The response from the Conservative Party in the past has been that they don't collect the data in that way. So we've changed how officials look at the data and collect the data so that we can report on it. I think people really do need to see our workings on these things because they've lost faith and trust that the government can do things like manage an immigration system in a coherent and responsible way. So we're having to show our workings on this, and it's all about transparency. And again, any sort of idea that, we've been pushed into this by the Conservative is completely for the birds. They had ample opportunity to do this over many, many years. They didn't. We've acted, and that's all it is, really.
Well, let's ask this big question. Why do people go into politics? Our two politicians here, not just to appear on fantastic programmes like Politics Live, of course. Let's have a look at some of our current leaders and their reasoning.
I believe in truth. Truth is not relative. Those who know me best know that I don't do spin.
Government can be a force for good. We can fight alongside working people in the name of justice and opportunity. That's why I came into politics.
Well, Rutger, your new book, Moral Ambition, Stop Wasting Your Talent and Start Making a Difference. Would you say that going into politics has that moral ambition in terms of a job?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's not where you go if you want to make the most money, usually. Right? Or am I saying something wrong here?
No, I think that's probably
I mean,
right.
what we see in this country and also in the United States is that a lot of talented people, who went to Oxford University or Cambridge, they're being sucked up by what a friend of mine always calls the Bermuda Triangle of talent. So you've got consultancy, corporate law, and finance, this dark chasm that sucks up so many of our best and brightest. So I always feel it's refreshing when people say, you know what, I'm actually going to do something for the public. I want to make this world a better place.
Right. Is that why you went into politics, Alex and Natasha?
Well, I mean, I think everybody sitting around this table is probably we're very privileged to be in this position to have jobs that we I think love, but feel like we're pushing for something better. We might not agree on what those things are or how we get there, but I do believe that we're all passionate about trying to make the world a better place. I think, though, work hasn't always meant that for people. It hasn't always been something that has allowed people to find that joy. Sometimes it's just about feeding your kids and keeping a roof over your head, and that's why you need to raise things like the minimum wage and make sure you have better employment laws so that work can be fulfilling and give prosperity.
Sure. Isn't that the key? Can people afford to do jobs that fulfil maybe a moral ambition when they can't pay the bills to put the food on the table?
Well, look, half of the country has a so-called essential job, right? Teachers, plumbers, care workers, nurses. They don't need a lecture by me or by anyone that they need to contribute more to the common good. But we have the other half of the country. There's a recent study that estimates that around 25% of people working as a marketeer, for example, or an HR manager or a consultant or a corporate lawyer or blah, 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 they think that their own job is socially meaningless. It's about 5 times the unemployment rate. People who have beautiful LinkedIn profiles, who have nice salaries, but still at the end of the day, they feel they can go on strike and no one would really care. I think that is one of the great betrayals of elites in this country and across the Western world. It's not a lack of empathy for working class voters, it is a lack of actually contributing to society. And this book is all about motivating people to pivot their careers to work on things that are actually important.
Alex?
Well, you're asking the woman who quit the BBC's prestigious talent pool to go and work for UKIP back when people thought leaving the EU was nutso.
No
so
comment.
I made that sacrifice, Joe, I really did. But look, I actually totally agree with what Rutger's saying. There's something very important about having a passion for what you do, and it occupies so much of your time. You know, whatever it is, whether it's cleaning the streets, whether it's nannying children, whether it's being a neuroscientist, whether it's in politics, you know, if you actually enjoy what you're doing and you have that sense of purpose, it is a huge fillip. So I actually think that, you know, what Rutger's promoting is absolutely true.
So just to be clear, I think that follow your passion is probably the worst career advice out there. So, I mean, Gandalf never asked Frodo, like, oh, Frodo, what's your passion, right? He said, look, this is the problem. You need to save the world, throw the ring into the mountain.
I'd save the UK from bustles. So, you know.
There are a lot of big problems we currently face as a species, you know, whether it's the threat of the next pandemic, democracy breaking down. We need talented, privileged people to take on those problems. And the great thing about this country is that it has a history of doing so. So in the book, Moral Ambition, I talk a lot about the British abolitionist movement. Now, I'm from the Netherlands. I don't have a proud history to share about Dutchmen taking on the slave trade or slavery. We did nothing. There was no such thing as an abolitionist movement. In France, there was a bunch of writers and intellectuals who got nothing done. But in the UK, a huge movement was kickstarted, mainly led by entrepreneurs. So that's also the message of this book, especially to entrepreneurial people. Don't waste your career, you know, climbing that boring ladder of success, but build a legacy that actually matters.
How do you persuade people to do that, whether they come out of school or whether they come out of university or they're like you, your sort of generation? How do you persuade people to quit their jobs if they're seemed meaningless and go and do something worthwhile?
Oh, I think that isn't that just called a midlife crisis? Is that what that's what happens sort of naturally? I
won't ask if you're there yet.
I think I had my midlife crisis years ago. I go and talk to a lot of students and a lot of pupils in schools, and young people. I don't know, it was always, that's young people, they do want to make a difference. They do want to have social meaning in the way that Rutger describes. But I think that there's something really interesting what Rutger said about entrepreneurs and the slave trade, in that I think one of the best ways of having social purpose is to be in business and be responsible. And that we need entrepreneurs, and we need business people, we need taxation in order to pay for services and to give the country what it needs. And some of the movements that inspired me when I was young were employers like Cadbury's, like Clark's, who took enormous pride in what they did for their workforces, what they did for their local communities. They had a sense of social mission which ran through a profitable company. And I think that we still have some of that, but that would be a wonderful thing to rekindle.
But how do you change conventional standards and metrics of success?
We really gotta try everything we can to redefine what it means to be successful. William Wilberforce, the great abolitionist, if you would have asked him on his deathbed what his life mission was, he wouldn't have said abolishing the slave trade. He would have said making doing good more fashionable. That's what it was all about. I think we can do it again today. What we currently have is an elite crisis. It's not a people problem, it's an elite problem. On both sides of the political spectrum. On the right side, we've got all these people withering away in, not very meaningful jobs. On the left side, we've got all these, pundits or academics wallowing in their own moral purity, but not really being serious about actually winning and actually making a difference. So I think indeed that we can learn from British history here and this huge movement.
Right, well, on that note, we'll see if anybody takes that all on board. That's all we have time for today. I will be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live here on BBC Two and the iPlayer from 12:15. Until then, have a very good afternoon, and thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. Bye-bye.